Welcome to the Self-Reflections podcast. I'm your host, Klaudia and Benny. Today we have the privilege of diving into the fascinating journey of Benny Vonken, a coach, world traveler, and advocate of minimalism and Stoicism. In this episode, Benny shares his personal story of self-discovery, the challenges he's faced, and the transformative power of Stoicism in overcoming life's obstacles. We'll explore the themes of mindfulness, gratitude, minimalism, and the importance of living in the present moment. Join us as we delve into Benny's insights on self-reflection, cultivating virtues, and finding meaning in life's challenges. We'll discuss the connection between Stoicism and other philosophies, and how shifting our perspective can lead to greater fulfillment and contentment. Get ready to be inspired by Benny's wisdom and practical advice for living a more intentional and balanced life. Welcome to the Self-Reflections podcast. I'm your host, Klaudia and Benny. Today with me, I have Benny Vonken, who has a tale to tell about his wonderful experience traveling, working as a coach, as well as in engaging in a life of minimalism and Stoicism. So I cannot wait to start this conversation. Benny, thank you so much for your time. It's lovely to finally meet you.
Yeah, and it's lovely to meet you too. And it's an honor to be on your show, and I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you so much. Benny, to get us started, can you tell me a little bit about yourself and what made you gravitate to coming onto the Self-Reflections podcast?
Yeah, thanks. My story it starts small. I'm from a very small town in the Netherlands. And I think that's also where a lot of my movements now in the future kind of help me kind of project towards. So I've moved abroad in 2010. So that's almost like 14 years now. I lived in Spain and Dubai, and I currently just kind of traveling and see where the wind goes as a house and pet sitter. That's a really nice tool to help me live a little bit cheaper. So if you ever need, need the snow and moon to have someone look after, then let me know. More than happy to do that.
Absolutely.
So no, that's something that I'm doing, and I think one of the reasons why I'm doing what I'm doing is because as everybody in life, you come across some obstacles and you deal with life, and you just try to find the best way to do that, and find your path in life as well.
Benny, what were some of those early life obstacles that made you decide that you wanted to leave the Netherlands and go exploring?
Yeah, again, that's an interesting thing. And during the last few years, and again, then we go into Stoicism and that self-reflection. And that's also one of the reasons why I like what you do on the podcast, and especially with your background. And I think, with the topic that I'm interested in, Stoicism, and I've seen, you're into CBT and those kind of more, evidence-based therapies. There's a big connection there. But for me, and I did a lot of self-reflection again on that point. I come from a very small town, and we ride our bikes everywhere. But I don't know if you know about the Netherlands. It's kind of rainy and drab, and the winters kind of get gray, and that really works on the mental health aspect. But I felt like closed in this little village, and so I always had that urge to kind of break free, to kind of move around and explore the world. And because of those obstacles of mobility back home, I felt that maybe that moved it a little bit, not to the extreme, because I really like what I'm doing, but I did explore those thoughts and those kind of beliefs at the beginning to make it into a more healthier way instead of kind of traveling for escapism. But I can go into that a little bit more. But those were the obstacles from coming from a very, very small town, knowing that there is a big world around, and then meeting people, interesting people, to show you like there's more here to learn. And that's kind of what I'm, pushed me towards what I'm doing right now.
I regularly tell my clients that your environment plays a crucial role on your well-being. And when we look at weather, access to sunshine, access to And while I can appreciate the Netherlands is a very, very beautiful country, if it sometimes impacts you in your ability to feel energetic and really positive, sometimes we do need to change our environment to then create a change internally. Do you feel that's what I'm hearing you say, Benny, is something that was one of the reasons you shifted into pursuing a life of travel and potentially moving to different places to experience, I guess, what life has to offer?
Oh yeah, definitely, and especially, and I've been when I was a child, and when I think back of my childhood, and a lot of the things that we do in our adulthood stems back from how we were raised and the beliefs that we created there. But I remember always going out in the woods and playing around and letting my imagination go run free. And that was sparked by a sense of curiosity that I still have. I'm very interested in people, and I think that that's also one of the reasons why I like coaching. And I've worked as an educator for about 10 years, 12 years. I mean, I was
Mm-hmm.
always interested in learning about the students. What was there behind it? Why were they maybe having some issues, or why were they driven towards certain subjects or whatever? And that curiosity
Mm-hmm.
really helped me find my way outside of my realm, and
Mm-hmm.
especially also with the environment that you live in, the nature, and I like the sun, I like the environments, but I also like to explore how people live. And for example, my ex, she came from Morocco, and that was a completely
Mm-hmm.
different environment to grow up in. So when I met her for the first time, and we started talking about global things, I realized that my vision and my worldview was so narrow that even
Yeah.
helped me spark more. It's like I got to learn more. There's so much more to this, and that's
Mm-hmm.
why traveling now slowly shifted from. And this is over the last 2 years, but it slowly shifted from that kind of escapism urge to more of like, no, I need to learn
Mm-hmm.
more. I feel like the world
Mm-hmm.
has been explored, but not by me, and this is my moment to
Yes.
explore the world.
Hmm. And what a beautiful commitment to yourself and to your life's journey that you have engaged in. And like, I really enjoy you saying initially it was for escapism, it was probably as a coping mechanism. And really, through your experience, it sounds like you were able to differentiate between what is escapism and then what is genuine immersion into your traveling experience. Can you tell me a little bit about that shift? Did it? You said it kind of happened for you. Did anything pivotal occur for that to transition you into more of a mindful or slow experience of travel, or was it just something that you learned about through your travels?
Then we go into the Stoic part of my journey, and that's where I really had the help. Right, we all need help, and we need some guidance. And luckily, I found
Mm-hmm.
Stoicism, and that really spoke to me on a personal level. And one
Mm-hmm.
quote stood out to me by Seneca in one of his letters, where he said. He was writing these letters to this young guy called Lucilius Jr., and he said, "You wander your travels do you no good while you're saddled with the very thing you're trying to get away from." And I was thinking, what am I trying to get away
Yeah.
from? Because you are traveling, but
Yeah.
you still carry all those things in your head. And one of the things, what I always had is when I like to have this kind of underdog position where people underestimate me, and then I can work myself up, right? And then it's like where you can get that praise, and maybe that was something that I was looking for from my childhood, to get that praise,
Mm-hmm.
get that positive confirmation. But then there comes this moment where people start to know you, and that was then my moment of fear. That was my moment, like, okay, now I have to go away because now the people know who I am, so now it can only go south. So that was one of the things why I was like,
Right.
thinking about myself, is this one of the reasons why I don't like to stay in a certain place too long? Because then people get to know who I really am, and all those fears come with like, oh, what do they know about my failures, about all my, my bad things. But what Stoicism, and mainly getting to know myself a lot better and asking myself these questions, really did. It grounded me in a stronger sense of self. So now
Mm-hmm.
I although we are humans, so the opinions of others do affect us, but they don't affect me as much as they do before, because I know who I am, I know what I'm doing, And that gave me a freer movement. When I was traveling, it freed up just my curiosity and the reasons why I'm doing it. So yeah, there was a specific moment when I was doing that and doing that self-reflection, and Stoicism did help me in that sense.
And Benny, you very much highlighted exactly what majority of us are petrified of, is that vulnerability, that rawness, to be fully seen and exposed, and the fear of being judged that we are not enough, judged of, like you've highlighted, our setbacks, our failures, things that we feel are insignificant in some way. And many of us are debilitated by those fears, and it prevents us from achieving anything, whether it's something as small as, in our home, or some of our biggest dreams that we want to then pursue throughout our life. So to have that revelation and be able to identify where your stuck points were and work on them is such a beautiful testament to growing into yourself. And I love how you highlighted there, building a sense of self, building a sense of worth, that you do not need judgments. While they might be out there, it does not define who you are. And it does take work, doesn't it, to go through the process of reflection, hence why I called it self-reflections, and be able to pull into changing a lot of those early narratives that we get stuck in and use to limit ourselves in anything that we then want to pursue in life.
Yeah, and I believe that you must have had the same. You moved to Australia when you were 5, I remember you saying in one of your first episodes. So you must have had those kind of similar experiences with traveling and moving abroad. I don't know how that affected you in that sense, or do you because are you going to travel again, or you have a lot of travels come up? But how did that affect you in that sense?
So my family wanted a better life for us, and came across on a program that they were providing families in Poland as immigrants. And we came here, and it was actually a very big shock because the program actually wasn't what they said they were, and there was no supports, and we actually had to come with nothing. They had 2 kids under 5 with $500 in their pockets and knew no one here in Australia and did not know the language. But they very much had a very hardworking ethic. So we were very fortunate in being able to then travel, whether it would be around Australia or every now and then be able to then go across back to Poland a couple of times there throughout my childhood. But there was something in me that I felt like I wanted to immerse myself in the experiences of adventure since I was a little girl. And I moved away from home to go to university and experience that. I have traveled the world, and I've been very lucky because my husband, being a pilot, was able to also provide us with the opportunities to be able to do that, which I'm so grateful for. And it's something that people know me. They are surprised if I'm in Sydney, like in Australia. So there's always a trip planned. I feel very rejuvenated through my experiences. And for me, I think I don't know if I'm actually running away and escaping from something. I feel like I'm running towards something when I am experiencing my adventures out there in the world, whether it's overseas or within Australia, whether it's on my own or with loved ones. I feel like I'm running towards something, and I feel like my soul is actually very full. My heart is beaming full of energy. And I always say, do what brings you the biggest joy and the biggest excitement. And it's one of those experiences for me where I feel like a child on Christmas Day, knowing a trip is coming up and being at the airport and going to somewhere new. It just fills me with, honestly, so much joy. So I think for me, the experience has very much been trying to tap into a part of me that might not actually be its fullest form when I'm having to then go into I don't want to call it generic because I love what I do, but the parts of me that work, the parts of me that provide a service, the parts of me that do what I do day to day, I find that in itself has a cap of joy. where when I find myself traveling and exploring, and connecting, whether it's connecting to others, new places, to myself, that in itself is indescribable. And people who do it know the feeling, but it's very hard for me to find the exact words to describe the feeling that I would feel inside here when I then travel.
Oh yeah, and I get that feeling that, and it's also the unnerving factor a little bit, going somewhere new and not knowing exactly. I like that. That is one of the things that I look for now, instead of that escaping, like, oh, nobody knows me, although I like to. I can be quite a hermit. Like, I'm now in this place in Ecuador. I'm overlooking the mountain hills, and there's pretty much no one
Oh,
around. And I do like that. I do have two lovely dogs. One is 15 and one is 7, and we go for like little hikes
oh,
here, and they're lovely. But I like this, but I also
yes.
like what you said, that kind of the connections they make, and that's why I like coaching, and that's why I like just talking here, and I love speaking different languages, so I get to practice my Spanish here, which is great. But it is nice to get out of that routine-based kind of work-wise. I think
Mm.
that is a nice way to
Mm-hmm.
put it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I want to take a moment to talk about Stoicism, and I actually did a little bit of research, because while I knew up here a little bit about Stoicism, I wanted to really explain to our listeners and audience what it is, as we keep referring to it. So it is something that originated in Greece and was later developed in Rome, gaining popularity among philosophers, statesmen, and everyday people seeking inner peace and fulfillment. At its core, and please correct me if I'm mistaken, Stoicism offers timeless wisdom for living a life of virtue, tranquility, and self mastery. So, the central aspects of Stoicism revolve around an understanding and accepting that what is within your control is in your control, and letting go of what isn't in our control. So really trying to focus on cultivating virtues such as wisdom and courage, and temperament and justice. Anyone who is trying to be more of a Stoic very much tries to align with their highest values, regardless of their external circumstances. Have I summarized that quite, in a way that aligns with some of the philosophies that you're guided by?
Yeah, and you did an excellent job. And I think the Stoicism is something that has a bit of a bad reputation, right? It's like that how we use, like, oh, you're a Stoic. That means like you shove your emotions aside, and you're just like this stiff upper lip, and upper stiff lip, and like a wall. But that's not what it is. And when people ask me, like, what is it? I think it's more of like the Western version of Buddhism or Taoism, where you really have
Yes.
this sense of deeper introspection and get to really know who you are. And that's why, again, as we mentioned
Mm,
a little bit, that's why modern day therapies use it as a foundational
yes.
block to build, because they knew back in the day, the Greeks, they knew what human psychology was about and how the mind kind of worked. Maybe not as deep as we do now, but they did have a very
Mm-hmm.
strong sense of what was going on. And as you said, the goal of Stoicism is pretty much going for this term that they call eudaimonia, which is kind of this joy, contentment, this inner peace and a peaceful mind. And that's really the goal. And you do that
Mm-hmm.
by exploring who you are, like really knowing yourself. I
Mm-hmm.
think that is the key of any foundation. And Stoicism is something that speaks to me, but I'm not here to turn people into Stoics. That is not my goal. It's not
No.
like, yeah, you've got to, this is the way to go. No, you've got to create your own philosophy of life. And I think that is something that people really need to look for. And how you do that is by asking yourself questions, just by really exploring
Mm-hmm.
yourself. And if you have, and Marcus
Mm-hmm.
Aurelius says in one of his quotes, the obstacle becomes the way. And that is the thing, because if you
Yes.
go, you can't ignore the obstacles in your life. And that's,
Mm.
when we look at Stoicism, we can only find true peace if you are able to live through the hardships of your life. Because it is,
Mm-hmm.
if we have to be honest, life is tough. Life is difficult, and it's not this easy walk in
Yes.
the park fairy tale journey that we all think of when we are children. But we have this life set out. I grow up, I go to school, I have a great job, I have a career, I have a family, and then suddenly things happen, right? And that's where philosophy of
Yes.
life really grounds you.
And where we learn the most about ourselves, about the people around us, the environment, it's in those experiences that we have the opportunity for growth. And it's so important that you've highlighted that, we speak of these philosophies or ideals not to shift anyone's perspective, but to also educate and share each other's stories, because I think that's so important in being able to connect with one another, with our community, and also then help provide a service of value. Benny, can you share with us what drew you specifically to Stoicism as a guiding philosophy of your life, and how has it actually influenced your worldview and lifestyle choices so far?
Yeah, and that's an interesting journey. And whenever I speak, because I do speak to a lot of people, who are going through this journey and who likes philosophy and Stoicism in general, we have like weekly live conversations on X, and we get a lot of people come over, and it always starts with a moment of adversity, right? As you said perfectly, it is the moments of difficulty where you learn the most about yourself. Because when you're up top of the mountain in joy, you're not going to sit there and it's like, oh, what should I work on? No, you feel great, right? So for me, it started when,
Yep.
right, no, that's the thing. Like, and for me, it started when my relationship, my marriage went downhill. We started separating, and that
Yeah.
led into a divorce. I had some physical injury. It wasn't too bad. I was playing football, and I pretty much, hurt my knee to the extent where football and certain sports were no longer an issue. Well, that was something that I really loved and enjoyed doing. And also,
Mm-hmm.
for example, alcohol was a big thing in my life, and I thought it was a great asset. But then I learned that it was very detrimental to who I am. So I've been sober for the last 4 years. And one of the key things was, when my marriage was going downhill. I had met a friend who was introducing me to some really great books. So I started reading a lot, and I really started investing time into myself. And at one point, I
Mm-hmm.
self-diagnosed myself with an existential crisis. So it's like there's something wrong, right? So. And then I really started delving into that aspect. So I read a great book called The Introduction into Existentialism, and that book dealt with absurdism, existentialism, Epicureanism, and also the Stoics. And that's where I started reading about them. And the more I started reading about them, the more I started reading about myself. And I felt like this is
Mm-hmm.
really speaking to me. And that's why I'm saying, like, this is something very personal. This is something very individual. So if you read the books
Mm-hmm.
and they speak to you, take it, go for it. And that's what I did. I
Mm-hmm.
started really delving into the old text, the modern text, and I
Mm-hmm.
started speaking about this topic. I started writing about it in a blog called the Stoic
Mm-hmm.
Padawan before, and now it turned into Via Stoica. But I love the Stoic Padawan because I also love Star Wars. But that's a side note. But and the reason why I started writing about it, because that really helped me internalize my thoughts, because I was reading about it and there were so many things going on in my head. I was really trying to place it, and it was all just scrambled, and I started writing about
Mm-hmm.
it for myself, but that didn't really help me.
Mm-hmm.
So the blog
Mm-hmm.
version helped, because I knew that I was presenting it to some other people. So I had to give it more structure, and I had to give it a little bit more of
Mm-hmm.
coherency, and also make it more enjoyable for the people to read. And what that did, it made me very conscious about what I was doing. So, for example, one of the first things I wrote about, and this is also one of the things that I really saw the practicality of Stoicism, was a quote by Marcus Aurelius. And I'm very bad at really reciting quotes. I do know them, but my memory, I don't know why. But it is, you wonder what. It goes like, this person is bound to act that way. It's like getting upset with a fig tree for secreting juice. And I was dealing with a coworker at work, and he was just annoying me. This person was just frustrating, and he was just playing these games and these tricks. And I would come back home aggravated, and I was like, oh, why is this happening? And I read that
Mm-hmm.
quote, and I was thinking, well, if I get angry, it's like me getting, angry because my fingers are sticky because I'm touching this tree all the time. This person is not going to
Yeah.
change, right? He's already older and he's
Yeah.
set in his ways. It's up to me to change my attitude towards him. And when I went back to
Mm-hmm.
school to work that day afterwards, I actually smiled when I saw it. I was like, yeah, now I recognize what's going on. This person is doing just the way he's
Mm-hmm.
doing, and that's great. That's his nature. I don't know if he's living the good life or whatever, but that's not up to me. that's out of my control, as you
Yes.
mentioned, right? With the dichotomy of control. I control my opinions and my actions. So I started taking, distance when I had to, or started talking to a more compassionate tone, or getting more understanding about who he was. And that really helped me see that practicality. So I wrote about that, and I started speaking about it in these spaces. And that really helped me delve into it more, because if you put yourself out there publicly, you want to know more. And that great saying, the more you know, the less you know. So the more I started learning, is like, oh wait, I don't know as much as I think. I don't know as much as I think. So I started learning more, and then that kind of turned into that circle where you know more, you apply it to life, and that's where my journey really grew. And one last thing before I kick back to you is, what I've heard in all of these conversations, a lot of people say, oh, I didn't even know I was a Stoic. I was a Stoic, but I didn't even know it. That's kind of the thing. And that was the same for me, because it felt so natural. It felt so good. And it actually gave me so much more peace. It's like, yeah, this is normal. The way I like it, it's good. So yeah, that really helped it become a way of life for me.
And going back to what you mentioned about the connection to Buddhism, for example, it's something that's been, the underlying themes and values have been around for such a long time. In my own reflections on being quite spiritual, and I've always been quite spiritual since I was young, but more so over the last few years that I have really immersed myself. And just like you've experienced there, Benny, I read a few books that really expanded my awareness and knowledge and helped me dive deeper into the connection of what felt comfortable for me in the exploration of who I am as an individual. And as I was in preparation for this podcast, was looking into some Stoicism and the principles there and the underlying themes, there's so many crossovers which are very, very aligned, and without having to put a name to it, feels very organic and authentic to even some of the things that I would practice, or I would then encourage in some of the therapy styles that I pull through with my clients, whether it's in a psychology stream or the coaching stream. But I really like where you've identified that it is how we then put meaning to things internally. And a lot of my work lately has been in my own development, has been to try and be very selective in how I put meaning to things, and how I then create a reaction in me that might not be serving me, or it might not be serving the experience in front of me. And hand on heart, that's still a work in progress. It was only like the other day where I was getting frustrated by something, and I was getting so immersed in it and so bothered. And then, my beautiful husband was able to just gently highlight that. And I was like, oh, damn it, I got sucked into that again. And we're beautifully human. That naturally happens. It's part of our human experience. And trying to use those moments of reactivity to be able to try and identify, well, what actually happened for me in that experience that made me put meaning to that in that way. And I find when I explore that on a deeper level, I'm able to work through it, and next time around not be so influenced by it. But it is something that will circle back, and I've noticed this in my life regularly. A lesson will circle back, or an annoyance will circle back, until I decide to react to it differently. So I regularly tell myself I need to take this lesson on, because if I don't, this is going to come back and bite me. So but I can appreciate not every time, and hand on heart, I fall into the trap of not having time or being too busy, and you're in the round again to go for the lesson again. But it is definitely something that we try and practice and take on. And I think that's very similar to what you were saying, is that meaning that we are trying to change in what it is we can control, and what is something that we have to learn how to let go through the process of reflective practice, and really, really shifting that emotional experience, because in the end it hurts us if we don't do so.
Yeah, and doesn't that make life wonderful if you have that mindset shift where you look at it as like a training ground, learning, you're learning more about yourself. You're in this kind of perpetual
Mm,
classroom of life, and that changes how you look at adversity as well, and how making mistakes really become an asset, how that really becomes something
mhm,
that improves your self growth. And I think that for me, that was
mhm.
personally one of the biggest changes of how to look at life. And I liked your conversation you had with Greg about the victimhood. Was it with no? That was it
Ah,
with Greg?
yes.
Yeah,
Yes,
right.
yes. Yes,
And
that was.
yeah, and you talked about how children. He mentioned that how kids don't have that
Mm,
kind of thought. And we do get that. Why? Because we then have our ego play around. It's like, I can't be wrong. I have to be right.
mhm,
And one of the
mhm,
things in Stoicism, they have this figure called, the sage. And Socrates was one of the closest persons to reach that state. But they also knew that they were not really gonna get there, right? Or the chances would be very slim. So the only thing
mm,
that they could do is do their
mhm,
best. And so when I speak to
mhm,
people and when we have conversations or in my coaching, it's just do your best, and you're gonna make mistakes. We're
mm,
human, we're all human, and we make mistakes, and that's part of life. And that's, as you said, that's
mhm,
the part that we learn most of. So we just have to do our best. And
mhm,
for me, that really changes your perspective of how to deal with those things and how to get through them. And I think that
mhm,
that's a wonderful power to have once you recognize that you're just on this path of growth, and that's what life is.
mhm,
There's an
mhm,
interesting essay by Michel de Montaigne, 16th century philosopher, that really spoke to me, and it's called "To philosophize is to learn how to die." And part of
mm,
philosophy is learning how to deal with that eventual end that we all go towards, right? Death. And the
mhm.
Stoics, they say, and many
Yeah.
philosophers, they say, how can this be a bad thing, as if it's so natural, right? They talk about
Mm,
change all the time.
yes.
Life is in constant flux, and we do have these kind of mini deaths that we go through on a daily basis, because
Yeah.
the moment now is already gone. So we have to learn to let go, and we have to learn
Mhm,
to move on. And that's where, when you
mhm,
mentioned Buddhism, Buddhism is very much into mindfulness, and that's the same with Stoicism, right?
mhm,
It's all about the now.
mhm,
We
mhm,
mentioned about like control, what is
mhm,
up to us. The past is gone. There's no, we can only
mhm,
learn from it, but at the end of the day, it's gone, and the future is
mhm,
not ours. So we can only focus on the now, and that is something that we should
mhm,
can really help us move forward and just stay in a more present sense. So in that sense, there is a very strong connection again with those Eastern philosophies. And the great thing is that the philosophers back in the day in Greece, they said, if this is the right way to live, if this is the best way to live towards peace, then we're not going to be the only ones who figures this stuff out, right?
mhm,
Because we have the
mhm,
same brain, the same mind as people all across the world. So I wouldn't be surprised if similar ideas pop up elsewhere, and they do, right? And that's what we
mhm,
see, and that's why these things are
mhm.
so similar.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Benny, you mentioned that you are currently in Ecuador and traveling and have traveled for a few years now. What are some of the lessons that you have learnt? I know you mentioned that you try and incorporate not only Stoicism, but a minimalistic life. Can you tell me a little bit about your travels and how those themes have been central to your experiences?
Yeah, and I think one of the main things is, and connecting it with the minimalistic part, is truly looking at what you value in life and what you really need to have. And one of the biggest lessons that I've learned across the travels, and I've had the fortunate life that I've been able to go to different places, that in the basis, most people want the same. I think all people want the same. They want a peaceful existence. They want their basic needs met, and I think we, especially in the Western world, forget what our basic needs are. Food, shelter, water,
Yes.
all of these things. While we look at
Yeah.
when we go to a hotel or a new place, the first thing we ask for is the Wi-Fi code, right? So that's the basic thing, and I think that is a bit of a miscalculation of what we have, what's really important in life. But most people just want to have a
Mhm,
safe environment, live in peace for them and for the people around them, for their close ones. And I think that that's something that we really share with everybody around us. I think that deep in the core,
mhm,
the problem is that we have different ways of executing it, different ideas of the details that go involved, but that's at the core. So that's one of the things that really that I really learned from traveling and really opening my mind to different cultures. But that helped me look at my values, look at my needs, look at what is important to me. And that's why when I left Dubai, and Dubai is the complete opposite from a minimalistic lifestyle, right? It's like the epiphany of
Yes.
capitalism. It's where you know
Yeah.
there's always a bigger fish, there's and that really, like, when I started there, and I wasn't nearly close to the top earners there. I was working as a teacher in the local schools, which was great, a great experience. I learned a lot there. It was not the easiest job, but you do get really easily involved into that money kind of machine, right? Where at one point you go to restaurants, you don't even look at the bill anymore. You just put your credit card down and that's it. So after a while, and I like finances, I like money. It's something that I don't know, again, from my childhood, from my family, we didn't have much when I grew up, so that is still innately there. And there's also sometimes this sense of not abundance, but of the opposite side. I can't really come up with the word, but the lack, right? The lack thereof. So I think that when I was living there, and after that first year, and then you kind of step out of the bubble and you start looking at your finance and you start reflecting on it, and that's when I start reading and doing all these things. I realized this isn't what I need. This isn't making me happy. And you just have a problem and you just throw money at it, or you lack this creativity to really solve your own problems. And for example, I had a flat tire once, so I just called someone to come and fix it. But the thing is, I really looked at how they did it. So the next time I did it myself, and I had such a sense of achievement, of purpose when I did that. And I think that that's what we lack in those things. So I left Dubai, I sold everything. Like now I travel, everything fits in my backpack. Well, I've got some book and some suits in my parents' house, but everything I own fits there. And it gave me such a sense of freedom, because I know that, and I live of very little. Like I look after myself, but I live of very little. And I think that also helped me realize that we don't need as much as we think we do to live a good life. The good life is there to grab. It's all in our minds. And that's one thing that the Stoics talk about. They say virtue is the only good, right? And they kind of shift from the cynics. They say virtue is the only good, and that's it. But Zeno, the founder of Stoicism, said, yeah, that's right. But I do have preferences outside of that. So I prefer health to illness. I prefer wealth to poverty, right? So, but we have to make sure that they don't own us. So people ask me this as well, like, like I like Stoicism, but I want to have this fancy car or want to have this thing in my life. It's like, yeah, that's great, right? If you can have it, but if it doesn't take away from your peace of mind, because you can have a fancy car and have it outside parked, but if you're constantly worrying if someone's going to scratch it, if someone's going to steal it, if this is going to happen, then the thing owns you. And then you lose that sense of freedom, that sense of self, because you're putting your identity completely to all the externals that you own. So we have to be able to let go. And one example was, for example, the books. Like I started reading a lot in Dubai, and I started building my little library, and it was a sense of pride. It's like reading this stuff, and it's really beneficial. But when I left, I looked at them. I was like, I was willing to pay a lot of money to bring them. And I sat with myself, I was like, this is not good, right? I'm attaching too much value to these things. So I put them in a little plastic box aside, and I was like, wrote a little note to give away. And I left them there for a while as I started packing all my things. Then I realized I did need a bigger suitcase, because I had clothes and stuff that if I would throw them away, I would have to buy new ones. And I didn't like that. I just like to use stuff. So then I had to get a new suitcase anyway, so I was able to bring them. But I had that exercise of being able to let them go. And I think that is important with the things that we have.
Coming from a background where my parents literally came here with nothing, they worked really, really hard, and I must take my hat off to them. They're very young and they're already retired. They were able to set themselves up really beautifully at the expense of their stress and a lot of hard work. And I also know how immersed in materialistic things they were, because we never had family here in Australia. It was just us four. So my mum would show love by buying things. Anytime there was a disagreement, it was very much the way that you'd repair. And so, growing up, it was a very stark contrast between my husband and I, who his family very much came here with not much and struggled as well, and very much learnt the value of saving and not spending and being very, very careful with their money. Whereas, Greg and I are just two ends of the spectrum when we first met, where I've noticed now I've started to, while I do have standards, or I do really, really love immersing my experiences with good quality things, I try really hard not to then overdo it, or be selective in what it is that I do then spend money on. Versus previously, like very similar to you, there was no conscious thought in future planning or even containment. It was very much that instillment of, well, I've got money, so I'm just going to spend it. And it's just this constant consumption. And very, very similarly to how I'm sure my mum coped when she's stressed, she goes and buys stuff. So naturally, that was something that was then bestowed upon me as a coping mechanism, and not then being able to contain myself. And it was very, very challenging to then start a relationship and now be married with someone who had the complete opposite, where, to buy something, God bless Greg, but he would be spending like 6 months to even consider whether it's worth the, investment. Where for me, I'm just like, let's just buy everything all the time. So, even just the transfer of our own early experiences in what we put meaning and value to then start shifting that. It is like, from what you've mentioned, Benny, it is such a personal experience, because we're not here sharing, saying to everybody that you can't enjoy good things. Absolutely, you are deserving of them. Very much so. It's making sure that, like you've identified, don't put so much meaning to it. Be comfortable with it being there. Be comfortable with it being gone. And that is a very hard process to go through in the world that we live in.
Yeah, and I think for me, when you say that, and it sounds so familiar, and while we didn't have much, there was always this phrase that my parents asked, like when we wanted stuff, they asked, like, "Do you really need this?" And at the beginning, when you're younger, that's really annoying. Yeah, I really need this toy. I'm a child. I need this toy. I need to play. And then when you grow older now, that sentence is like, it really helps me a lot, because, and sometimes maybe a little bit overboard. It was like, when I need something, it's like, do I really need this? Like, from when my parents ask me, like, what do you want for Christmas? It's like, I don't really need anything. I have everything I need, right? And even now because I have my backpacks and I have everything I'm a little bit, OCD in that sense. I know exactly where it fits. I can I can pack my backpack in like 15 or 20 minutes because I know exactly how it goes. And so adding stuff there kind of like, no, this doesn't feel good. So it kind of goes a little bit overboard, right? But that really helped me kind of to really evaluate what I need. But when you talk about these things about, that we can have things and it's fine to own things, we need to encourage a sense of gratitude of what we have right now. And that's lacking in people, because you can have this mindset of having things, but the problem is that you always want more. Right. And that's that ever moving goalpost of what is being induced. Right. We are fighting an uphill battle against marketing, against all these inputs from social media, seeing how great people live outside of our sphere that we don't even know. We don't even know if they're happy. Right. But we project our own sense of perceived happiness. Like, if I only reach this stage, then I'm going to be happy. If I only reach this, then I'm going to be happy. But when we get there, we realize that we're not. But if we create that sense of gratitude in what we have right now, and just sit with ourselves and say, oh, I have all these fancy things. I have all these things that make me happy. But do they really? Right. And then asking ourselves why, what is the reasoning behind it? So again, that's one of the things that, with these philosophies, when you really look at yourself and sit with it and be in the present moment and just look around and say, yeah, I'm great. Like, if I look around myself now, as you said, I'm in Ecuador. I just moved to a new place, and I'm always wonder to see how the world changes. And there's always something that you can see. There's beauty inside of, or outside of what you see. And I sometimes sit with myself and have that moment of gratitude. Yeah, I'm very grateful for where I am right now in life. Is it perfect? No. But whose life is perfect? And that's fine. And I have my struggles, but those struggles are great as well. So creating that sense of of gratitude is really important in life, and that can again change your outlook. And so I don't know how you, like, when you look at the shift with your husband and you, how did that kind of help you move forward as well, more centered, or what way?
I think we beautifully complement one another. I definitely pull him in ways where he develops, and he does that for me. And I think it's the communication and trust, and the devotion to going in a direction that you're both wanting to go, and knowing that it's wholeheartedly an area that you're both going to thrive in and benefit from. So I think if you apply all of those, we've been able to find a balance where we are regularly practicing gratitude and regularly putting in the work to then develop the opportunities that we're able then to have, let's say, the finances to be able to then spend. And when we do then spend, it is in a way where we're not putting too much meaning onto something that then we get tied to it in that type of way. But I really do like that you've highlighted the importance of practicing gratitude, because knowing the amount of lack in the world, to even be able to have a home, a computer, internet connection, just, our phones, that in itself already, you are so, how do I say this? You are so abundant. And I think being able to regularly practice that and communicate when we've maybe lost touch with what is important and valuable, I think that's another thing that both Greg and I regularly try and practice, because otherwise, if we don't, we might then flip back into naturally old habits. That there are times where I might then get stressed or excited, or my emotions might then kind of pull me into my old ways of coping, which then naturally can be damaging to myself or my own growth. So I think being able to know and have someone to be able to bounce off with that, whether it is Greg or whether it's my wonderful loving friends or even other family, it's about just being open and honest to those experiences, and also knowing that we've got growth within us constantly. And I think through a lot of those recent explorations into spirituality and mindfulness and practicing gratitude and being in abundance constantly, I think all of that has gravitated to being able to immerse myself in experiences that I am so grateful for and thankful for, and I'm also able to enjoy fully without then feeling guilty, because I sometimes feel that we might fall into the trap of feeling a lot of guilt that we're potentially doing something wrong, or that we shouldn't be having this, or that we're not deserving of it. And I think if it is, if you are lucky enough to have an abundance of something, I always say make use of that and be grateful for it, and live fully in the experience of it. So yeah, that's a little bit about, I guess, the transformation and the growth that has happened over time. But it's constant work. It's always a journey. And I think you've mentioned before, it's constantly knowing that it's on a spectrum, and, we are having a human experience. So there are going to be times where you're going to be flipping back into coping mechanisms that are not serving you, and it's about applying self-reflections and being able to then grow in the values that are going to then align and develop you in the direction that you want to be going, as for your own benefit internally, and then the benefit of your loved ones around you.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned that balance, that you really balance each other out. I think that's important, right? That's why, and then Stoicism sometimes is seen as this selfish philosophy where you have to work on yourself, which I think is key, because you can only be the best, the best for the people around you if you're the best version of yourself. But you do need that social structure to give you kind of some perspective of life, and to give yourself some balance, and also to feedback, right? I always look at life as like this mirror of who we are, right? And just like, because, and I think you mentioned it as well about the ego, right? Where your own kind of ideas are projected of other people, but we just get that feedback loop, right? I just like, okay, you're doing this bad. It's like, maybe this tells me more about myself than about this other person. So I think having that sense of balance is important. But also, when we practice gratitude, I think we can also, it is also easier for us to let things go, right? Because if I sit, because I think a lot of people they are afraid of letting things go because they don't really value it in the moment. Like even with family members or with
Mm-hmm.
people, like I've during my travels, I also spent 7 months with my parents because they had a 50th wedding anniversary and their celebrations were kind of apart. So I spent some time living with them, and that was such a great experience because we got to have breakfast again. We got to do these small little things, and I was actually sitting there and practicing the gratitude. And one of the things that really helped me with traveling is that as well, like where you really sit in that moment, because life is so fleeting. It goes from
Mm-hmm.
one moment to the next. But just sitting
Yes.
with yourself is like, this is great. I'm so fortunate that I still
Yeah.
have my parents around and that I can still have these
Mm-hmm.
experiences with them that I took for granted so many years. So that is something that has
Yeah.
really taught me to kind of be able to sit in that moment, but also realize that it's going to be gone at one moment. And that's why,
Mm-hmm.
appreciating it now is the only moment you can, because when it's gone, you're going to sit there with resentment. It's like, oh, why didn't I use this time to the fullest? And there's
Mm-hmm.
this nice, I can say it in Dutch, but it's a sentence in a Dutch song, and it's probably some kind of common phrase, but it's better to have lost something than to have never had it at all. But that really needs us to
Yes.
have this practice of being there in the moment and just saying, okay, I have this right
Mm-hmm.
now, and let's just enjoy it. Let's just sit in this joy
Mm-hmm.
and see it for what it is. And then we can able to
Mm-hmm.
let go. And I think that that's also a part of moving on with life. That constant change. That's the only constant
Mm-hmm.
we have. We only know that the moment from now is going to be different from the moment from next. And there's this, I don't want to throw too many quotes around, but there's a quote by Heraclitus, and Marcus Aurelius mentions it. And he said, a person can't step in the same river twice because it's no longer the same river, nor is
Mm-hmm.
it the same person. And that's life. We can't step in the same
No.
now twice.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That is such a pivotal and profound way of being able to describe how important mindfulness and presence and being with the moment are fully, because that in itself is going to create so much ability for you to practice gratitude and for you to connect with what you can control, because we're often, pulled back into the past, going into planning of the future. And I often work with this with my clients in trying to get them to practice to be in the here and the now. And I like that you identified there that, even the tiniest, smallest of things that you do notice, having breakfast with your parents, or, watching the sunset or sunrise, or when you're spending time with dogs, even just like looking at their little whiskers, like something as tiny as that in itself is, so soul filling, and it just slows everything down and allows whatever needs to be worked on, whatever needs to be processed to come to the surface if it needs to in that moment. Otherwise, you are actually just immersing yourself in the experience that's there, and it's you and the moment, which is such a beautiful thing to have, and it's such a privilege to be able to have that skill. And it is a skill. It does take practice. I know that many individuals say that they can't do it or they find it hard to be present in the moment. I get it. I sometimes fall into the trap where I'm not. And it is something with practice that can be applied and perfected to a point where you are able to just be in the moment and fully immerse yourself in that experience.
Yeah, exactly. And there's again, philosophy can really help us with that and asking the right questions.
Mhm.
And one of the things that,
Yeah.
the things that we can do is like what really helped me when I was dealing with some kind of worries or anxieties, something that's happened in the future.
Mhm.
I asked myself the question, what can I do about this right now? Is there something that I can do right now? If so,
Mhm.
do it. If not, then focus on what I
Mhm.
can do right now. And one of the things is, for example,
Mhm.
just looking around and being grateful and focusing on what you have right now and moving that mindset from
Mhm.
what you think about might happen to what is happening right now, because we can't know for sure.
Mhm.
And Seneca said, we suffer more in imagination than we do in reality, right? And that's
Yes.
because we are
Yes.
thinking about what's happening in the future, and the future doesn't happen. And I've had it many times where maybe some people listening to this might have the same, where you have this future thing planned and you're kind of really dreading it and you're looking up against it and then it doesn't even happen, right? And then you're like, why did I spend hours worrying about this? Well, it didn't even happen. So now I just like, you know what? And this also stems from a sense of trust and confidence in yourself. If you are secure about who you are, which is something that I'm still working on as well, which isn't easy, and it's an ongoing process. But if you are secure about who you are, you can deal with the now. We've dealt with so many nows in our life that we can deal with the next one as well. And we have all the tools that we need in our tool belt right now to deal with what we're dealing with right now. And if we project that then in the future, we are rock solid. There's nothing that we can really, and if it's too much for us to bear, well, then that's it. We've had a good life.
Benny, I want to talk a little bit about finding genuine connection in self through your travels. What role does mindfulness and self-awareness play in your journey towards genuine connection to yourself, and how do you nurture these qualities in daily life?
Yeah, so one of the key things I think in philosophy, and then there was the oracle in Delphi said, "Know thyself." So it's key, right? Knowing who you are. And for me, again, it stems from this sense of curiosity that I think we kind of lose as adults because we are too afraid to kind of have people see who we are. And the worst person who can see who we are is ourselves. And we have this bit of, all these things that we try to unravel and sometimes might not even dare to look at. And that's why one of the virtues in Stoicism is courage, right? It takes courage to really ask yourself those questions and to dig deep. And I think that is necessary. And sometimes we do need help, in certain ways, maybe, more professional help, like a psychologist like yourself, or maybe in another level like coaching, or just, having family members and having someone to reflect on. I think that is really important. But having that self-reflection and having the courage to do that authentically and not being afraid of dealing with difficult things, I think that is very important to do. And also asking yourself, like, why are things affecting me? And again, Stoicism is often seen as this emotionless state of being, but it's not that at all, right? Emotions, they give us such a great source of information. They tell us who we are and how we respond to life and why things are affecting us in such a great way. Like anger, like, grief, like joy, like happiness, they tell us what we want. And as long as we can get the information out of it, then we can learn so much more about ourselves. And I feel like when people ask me, it's like, oh, I just want to live that happy life. I want to have a purposeful life. And they just focus on that one thing that they need to find while they forget about all the other things that telling them so much about what they don't like, what they don't want to do, where they don't want to go. And I had this analogy, someone told me about this, tracker in the jungle or wherever, tracking animals. And sometimes losing the track is just as important as staying on track. And that's what life is, right?
Yes.
And we have to, because it's such a great source of information, but we have to have that mind open to really take it in and to sit with it. And yeah, again, if you need a guide to help you look into that information and see what it tells you, then that's what you need to do. And if you can do it by yourself, not by journaling, by meditation, and I don't really journal on like a piece of paper. I'm not very consistent on that, but I like to use X, which is now Twitter, to kind of write my thoughts in the mornings and in the evening and kind of turn into poetry. And I use an 8i to make a nice little image. And I post that, and the reason why, because again, it's concise. So I really have to think about what I'm thinking about and what words I use. And because I'm putting it out there, I want to make it, again, why I started the blog, I want to make it kind of coherent and give myself a little bit of focus, a little bit of a point where it's like, okay, this is what I'm working towards. So those are the things that really help you get into that self and to the discovery of who you are.
And I like that you've identified that the things that we don't want, don't like, fear or have issues with are just as important as all the things we do. Sometimes we get stuck, and I'm sharing a little bit about my own personal journey recently where I kind of know where I want to go, but also I definitely know what I don't want. And I kind of was really stuck in thinking that that's not enough for me to start making the choices for me to go into a pathway. And I think even just as you were talking about it, it really, really hit me in my, I guess, reflection on how much pressure or judgment I'm putting even on myself, that it needs to happen a certain way for us to keep going. And I think giving ourselves permission that introspection, that inner work, those curious questions, they don't always have to be future orientated, future focused, and wanting to kind of look at your likes and all the positive stuff. It's also about the nitty gritty. It's the dirty stuff. It's the hardships. It's the things that we very much don't want to face, that a lot of the time will help shift into whatever it is that we potentially might be wanting to develop within ourselves. And I know it's hard to look inward, and I'm a journaler, so I always have had kept journals, all different types. But lately I have been getting a bit more specific in what it is that I'm actually journaling about. I practice gratitude, and I very much, write out, exactly what I want my future to be. But I think lately I've been getting a little bit bogged down in, putting pressure on myself to have to shift really quickly. And I think the more I then do the work, the more parts of me that come up that sometimes I don't want to face. And I know my clients feel the same way too. They are ashamed of those parts. We call it the shadow part. We very much don't want to face it. We feel very ashamed and very kind of like disconnected from that part. And I think a lot of the work needs to happen, that you're not just accepting parts of you that you like or others like about you. You're also getting to learn about the parts of you that you might not like and also make up who you are. And through that experience, you're then able to shed layers that are holding you from being able to accept yourself fully and get to know yourself fully. So I just want to normalize that it is hard to do, to be curious about yourself and do the inner work. And it's also a non-negotiable experience to be able to connect to self and also then shift into a state of growth, inner growth.
And exactly, and we need compassion for that, right? And that's one of the things that
Yes.
when you look at the Reader Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, the first book is where he's listing the people who gave him some wise lessons, and his adopted father started with the word compassion. And when we are dealing with these shadow parts of our lives and going through those difficulties, sometimes you just got to say, hey, we be a little bit kinder to ourselves. And it's not necessarily falling into that victim mentality, right? Because that was something that I was doing as well, where it's like, oh, why me? Look at me, the world is against me. But you ask yourself, why not me, right? If it happens to someone and it can happen to me, that's I just got to deal with it. But we can be more compassionate about to ourselves. We can say, I'm doing the best that I can, and as long as we're doing that, then we can look back at our day. And one of the tools that the Stoics use with the journaling, they use it from the Pythagoreans. They have this like, okay, write 3 things that you're grateful for, one thing that didn't go as well as you wanted it to go, and one thing you want to improve for the next day. So those are kind of tools that can really help us. But then we also, when we do that, we shouldn't be too harsh on ourselves. Also not too lenient. We need to find that kind of balance. We need to say, hey, I need to step it up here. I need to just improve better. I need to learn a little bit more. If I go on conversations, make sure that you know what you're talking about, or or when I go to my work, do your best. Even if you don't like your work, just put in your best effort. You will always go back with a better feeling about yourself because you've put in the effort. And if you do have a rough day, just go back home and say, yeah, I've had a rough day. This is life. Again, Seneca talks about, he says, why weep of parts of life? All of life is worthy of our tears, right? Because it's just tough.
Yes.
We're all humans. And I think if we focus a little bit less on seeing these great images on Instagram and on the social medias, like, because those are only the snapshots of people who are having, those great moments of life. But you don't see what's happening behind the cameras. They might be miserable, right? But we don't know. But we've got to focus on ourselves. So if we feel bad about ourselves, just be a little bit kinder. I think that would help a little bit more, and find support, and don't be afraid to ask for help. And especially with men, for
Yes.
myself, I think that is such a big obstacle, to ask for help, to ask for
Mm-hmm.
support.
Mm-hmm.
While it's so important to do, just if you have a good friend, just tell them, hey, I'm struggling, right? And you don't even have to go into
Mm-hmm.
all the details. And I think that's one of the things when you talk about having this future vision. We are so stuck in the details that sometimes we forget about what's really important. And having a vision of my life, and this is something that I was driving home from work in Dubai, and I was like, and then I was just, this is not really my life. So what is important in my life? And I kind of came with this elevator pitch, motto of my life is like, I don't want to have to work, but I want to have the freedom of time and space for me to pursue my passion and to help people as I do. Right. So I quit my job without having any new job, without having any really income. But I said, I need to take this time. And I've given myself that time by saving up a lot of money, for me to live the life that I have now, and to say, okay, I'm going to explore what I need to do. And I started writing, I started speaking about this thing. At one point, I started coaching. Again, this was very, when you talked about this in an episode on the imposter syndrome, I was riddled with the imposter syndrome. When I started blogging, I was like, who am I to talk about this stuff? And then I started speaking to my friends and families, and they was like, why don't you do coaching? It's like, who am I to coach other people? What am I? Who do I think I am? So then I wrote one page. It's like, yes, Stoic life coach, and it happened to go up in #1 in Google, and I started coaching. Right, and it's like, and I really enjoyed
that's amazing.
it. But it's about those things, you just gotta say, I'm gonna do it, right? I'm just gonna do it and see what happens. What is the worst that can happen, really, right? And then, but if we get too stuck in those details, and we lose track of the vision that we have in life, we will figure it out, because that's the direction we want to go. But people want to know the exact footsteps that they want to place. They want to know the exact signs. No, life is not going to tell you. If you have a vision, you can go and just do it, right? And just do it and see. I'm the kind of person who jumps and then, asks, did I bring a parachute, or, where am I going to land? I just like, okay, let's see what happens. And I think that's also the wonderful thing about life. Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. Take the risk, take the opportunity. And if everything fails, you weren't anywhere less than where you were previously. So if anything, you're going to be growing with the experience. Looking ahead, what are some aspirations or goals you have for your coaching company or business? How can people get in touch with you if they want to? Where are your next travels? Tell us a little bit about, I guess, some future plans, even though I know you live in the moment, but are there some future plans for you that you're excited about?
Yeah, and I think it is good to have, again, that vision, but also some future plans to work towards. And one of the great things is that I started my blog for my own, the Stoic Padawan, and I started speaking on X. So if people want to find us and have live conversations about this, where they can listen but also participate, because that's a great tool in those spaces. So we host them weekly on X there, and my handle there is the Stoic Padawan, so you can find me there. But that's also where I met my current partners in not in crime but in business. Where we started Via Stoica, so we changed that to Via Stoica, where we do offer coaching, where we do offer other things, and we're looking into motivational speaking and all of these kind of things to really spread the word of Stoicism. And that's also where we started the podcast Street Stoics, because we feel like this is a tool that really helped me, and it's great to find like-minded people. Again, I come from such a small village, the chances of me finding someone who is into Stoicism there is slim to none. So going out online and finding them was such a great experience. And I actually spent a couple of weeks, maybe a month or so, with one of them in Panama just before I came here. So that was great to kind of meet up in real life and have these conversations and build something together. So that's what we are building still, having more conversations, just kind of spreading the right kind of Stoicism. And we do open it up. And the great thing about these spaces is there's so many women join us as well, having these conversations. But we do see that a lot of men reach out, right? So we are kind of focusing on men's mental health and giving them some support. And Stoicism has gotten a bad rap, but there's so much value in it. So we want to share that out. So that's kind of where my vision is for that sense. but also to work on myself. So I use it kind of, selfishly as well. Like I try to help people, but in the same time, I'm getting back a lot for as well. And then with traveling, I don't really know. Like, to be honest, like I've been house and pet sitting for the last 2 years, and I kind of let that guide myself. If I see a new opportunity arise and it feels good, then I'll just do it. And so, I do want to go back again to my family, because my parents are getting older, and going through the pandemic, you realize like things can happen quickly. So if I wanted, that's why I wanted to give myself that freedom of space and time where I could, because as a teacher, I like teaching, but you're stuck to your holidays. And I lost one of my dearest uncles at one point, and I couldn't go back home because the holidays weren't there. So that was kind of, a sad moment, and also realization to say, okay, I want to be able to make those decisions to go to the things that I think are important in life. So yeah, I do want to go back home and spend time there, and I want to travel, and I want to meet friends and meet new people everywhere. But the details, I don't know. I do know how I want to live. Yeah. And that kind of is my guiding sense there.
And I like that you said don't get hung up on the details, because if you can connect to your values and the principles, everything will flow around that. And if you lean into it, abundance will flow beautifully. So I wouldn't have said it better myself. That's so exciting for everything that you've got happening for you, Benny. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on today's podcast and learning about so many different beautiful principles, as well as quotes from so many amazing philosophers. I was actually going to say to our audience, I'm going to get Benny to send me some of his favorite books that I might actually put in the description below, because we're all about sharing knowledge and encouraging people. So if something really gravitated to you that you really want to learn more about, of course, please leave a comment in the comment section, and I'll be passing that on to Benny, and we can, of course, get back to everybody. But we will be sharing certain resources and books in the description below as well. So please check that out. Is there anything else that I haven't asked about, Benny, that you would love to share with our community at this point?
No, I really enjoyed the conversation, and I think we covered so much about, living a better life. And I think that's the main thing. Like, we just want to try to live better. And I feel like if everybody just tried that and tried to live like 10% better, the world will look different, right? So be compassionate to yourself, be compassionate to the world around you. But it all starts with this foundation of yourself, right? The self is so key in this, to have a good foundation in who you are, your values, your principles. And again, find your philosophy of life. Ask yourself those questions, think about life. And from then, just spread the word. We teach best by setting the right example. Instead of telling people how to live, just live well yourself, and then the people around you will gravitate towards you. But no, it's been great, Klaudia, and it's been awesome to be on this conversation. I was looking forward to it so much, and it exceeded my expectations. So thank you very much for this.
Mine too. It's been amazing. Thank you so much. It has been an absolute honor, and I'm sure that we will circle back to future episodes together. Again, thank you so much for being part of the Self Reflections podcast, and take care. And until next time, Benny, look after yourself.
Thank you. You too.
As we conclude our enlightening conversation with Benny, we're left with a deep appreciation for his journey and the timeless wisdom he shared. Benny's experiences traveling the world, embracing minimalism, and living by Stoic principles offer invaluable lessons in self-reflection, mindfulness, and personal growth. Throughout our discussion, we've explored the transformative power of shifting our perspective, finding meaning in life's challenges, and embracing a life of virtue and tranquility. Benny's commitment to self-awareness, compassion, and living in the present moment serves as a guiding light for those seeking a more intentional and fulfilling life. Thank you for joining Benny and I, and thank you to Benny for his generosity in sharing his journey and insights with us. His story is a powerful reminder that even in the face of adversity, we can find inner peace and purpose through self-reflection and mindfulness. And of course, thank you to you, our listeners, for joining us on this journey of self-reflection. Be sure to subscribe for more inspiring conversations, and until next time, remember to embrace the present moment, practice gratitude, and prioritize self-awareness in your own journey to personal growth.